Who really knows? Who will here proclaim it? Whence was it produced? Whence is this creation? Perhaps it formed itself, or perhaps it did not. The one who looks down on it, in the highest heaven, only he knows, or perhaps he does not know. That is the Nasadiya Sukta from the Rig Veda. One of the oldest spiritual texts on earth openly admits that the sacred may not even know its own origins. This radical, epistemic humility stands in sharp contrast to the way we often view religion today. We are accustomed to rigid boundaries, strictly drawn lines between the orthodox and the heretic, the believer and the outsider. To find where those lines began, we have to rewind roughly 100,000 years. Long before priests or scriptures, early human bands were sitting around fires, burying their dead with flowers, and staring up at the night sky. They were confronting the sheer mystery of their own existence. This was animism, an emotional and cognitive recognition that the world was alive. The river possessed a mood, the forest was inhabited by presences, and the animals were spiritual equals. It was a fluid, felt experience rather than a structured theology. For most of our history, spirituality required no membership. There was no central authority to dictate truth, and no specific circle you had to join. You were simply embedded in a nature that responded to you. This boundless awe worked for wandering bands, but as we began to settle in permanent villages by the thousands, we faced a new tension: the need to keep large groups of strangers living under a common identity and a shared set of rules. Agriculture changed the stakes of human life. A single dry season now meant the difference between a successful harvest and total starvation. That intense anxiety over the weather and the soil led to the creation of transactional gods. These were hierarchy-based powers, sun gods and rain deities who required collective rituals, sacrifices, and the first massive temples to ensure survival. This is where we see the birth of the circle. As societies outgrew local beliefs, they turned to organized religion. It created social cohesion by defining a clear orthodoxy, a circle of belief telling you exactly who was in and who was out. Centuries later, universal religions utilized these exact frameworks. They built structures designed for global expansion, establishing clear parameters for membership that could be transported across any border. This chart of glyphs represents the shift toward codification. To maintain these massive circles across empires, spiritual experiences were turned into defined scriptures and managed by a specialized priestly class. These systems successfully scaled human cooperation and kept complex civilizations from tearing themselves apart. But they achieved this by trading away the boundless personal inquiry of the original open field. Yet in the Indus Valley, a different civilization was emerging, one that built complex cities without relying on the rigid spiritual borders seen elsewhere. This was the foundation of Sanatana Dharma. It achieved immense philosophical depth while intentionally keeping the open field model alive. Rather than maintaining a rigid boundary, it functioned by absorption. It folded in local deities, tribal rites, and diverse folk practices, creating a cultural fabric that didn't require everyone to believe the same thing to belong. Instead of a central pope, the tradition was driven by the rishis and philosophers of the Upanishads. They used public debate to explore the nature of consciousness and the mechanics of karma, prioritizing individual inquiry over institutional decree. This decentralized approach allowed the tradition to hold space for atheism, polytheism, and monism simultaneously. Social order was maintained not through a mandatory creed, but through the shared concept of dharma, a collective moral responsibility. It demonstrates that a civilization can sustain a complex ethical framework and a functioning society while leaving the mystery of the divine entirely open to interpretation. History shows that when fluid, unorganized traditions collide with aggressive, expanding circles, the open field is inherently vulnerable to being overwhelmed. We see this across the globe as indigenous and local traditions faced colonization, forced conversion, and modern cultural erasure. This creates a survival paradox. To protect the fluid core of their belief from extinction, unorganized traditions are forced to build their own institutional armor. In India, the Bhakti movement organized devotional communities to bypass rigid temple hierarchies, creating a resilient network of poet saints that could survive medieval incursions. During British colonial rule, the Arya Samaj established schools and formal legal bodies specifically to resist missionary threats and the pressures of the colonial census. They used the tools of organization as a shield for a decentralized identity. Today, the cycle is turning again. In a modern landscape where many are abandoning rigid religious circles in favor of being spiritual but not religious, we are seeing a return to that original human impulse. Sanatan Dharma stands as a long-term alternative to the rigid circle, a reminder that the deepest spiritual truths are protected not by the walls of an institution, but by the freedom of the open field.